Welcome to Valuable Coaching, hosted by Kevin Pratte and Miles Holland, with guest coach Sam Crosson. Now let's start the show.
All right, welcome to Valuable Coaching. I'm Miles Holland, my co-host Kevin Pratte, and you can find us on YouTube at Valuable Coaching. You can also find us on Google Podcasts and Spotify, as well as other podcast areas. Today we're lucky enough to have head coach from Berkley, Sam Crosson, and Kevin's going to go ahead and give us a little bit of his background.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Coach Crosson. Coach Crosson is from Santa Cruz, where he actually played club volleyball as a child there. And after he played club volleyball, he went to University of the Pacific to play for Coach Joe Wortman. When he was at University of the Pacific, he met his wife, Courtney, and now they're happily married. They have two wonderful daughters, McKenna and Logan. After Coach Crosson graduated from the University of Pacific, he ended up joining Joe Wortman's staff, and he was on the men's volleyball staff. He did that for a few seasons, and he went over to Santa Clara and worked over there, and then hopped over to St. Mary's to work with Rob Browning, then went down to Cal Poly, he was a Cal assistant. Then he went down to Cal Poly as a head coach, and now he's back up at Cal coaching. So, Coach, it's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for being on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for having me. This is a wonderful opportunity and looking forward to it.
All right. Well, we've kind of been starting off most of these interviews just trying to get people's background. You are from a kind of a volleyball area there in Santa Cruz, but how did you kind of get your start in volleyball? And was that kind of one of the first sports you played, or did you progress from other sports into volleyball?
Yeah, it was not on my radar for a long period of time. Growing up in Santa Cruz and that kind of area, it was three sports a year. It was soccer in the fall, basketball in the winter, and baseball in the spring. That was pretty much all the way until maybe around middle school or so, and then to go to high school, pretty much just because of the one that I was most interested in was basketball. Or the one that I just loved playing the most at that time. So I kind of dropped the fall and the spring sports, and played varsity basketball my freshman year. Had a teammate named Tim Young who went to Stanford, who was like 7'2" in high school, who was a year behind me. So we had a pretty solid high school team for about 3 years. My freshman year of high school was the first year that the league, if you will, at the time, the SCCAL, actually had started a high school boys season. And so it was like, hey, this is something in the spring. I hadn't played baseball in years, so, I was just looking at volleyball. I had some time I was growing up with my dad down in Santa Cruz. He was one of the kind of quote-unquote local beach guys, if you will. So kind of on the weekends, he would kind of haul me down there, and I'd do the whole hang out and watch and shag balls and junior lifeguards and all that kind of stuff. And then my sophomore year, a guy named David Noble started a club called Team Santa Cruz. And that was my first experience at club volleyball. So really started kind of playing my sophomore year. The high school kind of boys thing kind of faded away for a few years. So it really just was a club sport at that time. And just a bunch of guys from Santa Cruz High, Harbor High, Aptos, Soquel, kind of in the area. And, I didn't really know at the time kind of what to expect. And, we wouldn't go down to LA and play the LA clubs kind of like they do now, obviously with a lot smaller of a size then. And then really as I kind of went through high school, junior year, kind of during the recruiting process, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do in college. And as I kind of did some investigating into what my basketball potential options are, I realized that being a 6'4", pretty kind of non-athletic four, if you will, power forward wasn't really the cat's patootie when it came to being recruited for basketball. So I knew I wanted to, I wasn't ready to just be done playing sports. And fortunately, I had a club coach in David Noble who was, good and really helped me just become a better volleyball player, and was able to be recruited by some colleges. And, as you said, ultimately ended up choosing to go to UOP for a variety of reasons. But no, that's my kind of official start into volleyball was just kind of process of elimination, and really liked, the club teams that we had. And, there's a lot of crossovers just because Santa Cruz is kind of small. So, there were a fair amount of guys that we play against in basketball that all of a sudden we play against in volleyball. And then a few of them actually were on the club team. So kind of an interesting and awesome experience just to be at that age and, kind of have some of your arch rivals at other schools and all of a sudden find out that you actually get along and actually like and respect them as other athletes because you're playing together on the same team and they can help you win. And I think that's one thing that obviously a lot of competitors like is just having people next to them that they know they can kind of be in the trenches with. So that was kind of my start, if you will. Committed my senior year, took a couple of official visits. And like I said, ultimately ended up going to UOP just, for a few reasons. One, it was closer to home, which was good for me. Had a good major, I thought, at the time in terms of sports science, which is an area that I wanted to kind of get into. I didn't really know what I wanted to study, but that was kind of an attraction for me. And honestly, another attraction really for me was it was just so new. I mean, the men's program there had only been Division I for a year. And so, kind of now looking back, it's probably a unique thread for me is just this concept of trying to build. And I don't know if that's kind of the genesis of it for me or not. But I've come to kind of known, at least from my time at St. Mary's and especially my time at Poly, kind of starting with a team that was towards the bottom third or so in the conference for a historical number of years. And all of a sudden just kind of putting the pieces together and kind of architecting a roster and a culture, and had a really, a bunch of coaches along my path that just kind of opened some doors for me. And, it started with Joe, just giving me an opportunity to come back and help out with the men's team. And at the time I was living down in Santa Barbara with Jason Donnelly, who was an ex-teammate at UOP, and kind of living the Santa Barbara life, if you will, and working down on State Street and playing a lot of golf. And that was, it was a fun time, but certainly not something I could do for the rest of my life. So had the opportunity to go back. Also as well, which I'm really thankful for, they it allowed me to also go to grad school while I was coaching at UOP, so I could get my master's degree at the same time, which I think has helped tremendously in terms of my ability to get opportunities kind of going up the ladder in the coaching world. And then transitioning to Santa Clara with John Wallace and the success that he's had there with that program at the time in 2004. And then Rob Browning from St. Mary's from 2005 until 9. And then one more final kind of jump to Cal for a couple of years in 10 and 11 with Rich Feller. And then after those 2 years at Cal, just having the opportunity to interview and make that leap of faith, if you will, going down to Cal Poly to start my head coaching career. And I mean, we look back on that, Courtney and I, just as the time in our lives. Kids were younger. Logan was maybe a couple of months when we moved down there. So to have that kind of opportunity of a location and a school and the academics and the support from the community, we have a lot of fond memories of that time down in SLO, and really excited to be back up in Cal. It's always been kind of, my dream school that I've wanted to coach at. Was kind of reinforced when I was there for a couple of years. I didn't go to Cal, obviously, and I don't really have a whole lot of connections to Cal. But there's just something about places that you go to where it just feels like home. And being here in 2010 and 11, it kind of just cemented that for me, and looking at, where do I want to go and how do I get there? One of the things I knew that I had to probably do was to leave and go be a head coach somewhere. Whether that's the Big West or the WCC or the Big Sky, and, kind of, get down in the weeds and build something and show that you can actually kind of go on that limb by yourself with your staff and create something that you want to accomplish. So very fortunate, to have the help along the way with those coaches that are obviously, well known in California in the volleyball world. And then coming back to Cal for the first year and, having the success we did this last year, going 20-10 and, kind of being a bubble team, if you will, just, didn't kind of finish out the season as well as we'd like to. And kind of starting, I wouldn't say the whole thing over again, because Cal's program, I don't think was nearly as, I'd say, in chaos, if you will, as at the time when I kind of stepped on campus for the first time, at least compared to Cal Poly's team. We finished last year and then got to January, February, and March, and really felt like we were making some good progress just in terms of culture and team, and recruiting's going well. And then COVID came. So we've been, kind of managing that time frame from now, and, just been going through our kind of fall semester right now, and getting ready to, hopefully potentially start up here in the spring with the pseudo 2021 season. And kind of see what that's going to look like as we get going. But no, overall, it's been an amazing kind of journey from start to finish. And there's times when, you think back and, Miles, with you being at UOP and, having those players and, guys like Chris Thomas and Aaron Walkfogle and, Matt Griffin and, just Daryl Dillmore, just to throw out another San Diego in there. There's just there's a great environment that I think Joe had created there, in a culture, and it's a testament that we all, on occasion check in with one another. We see each other. The tree of coaches who have come out of there is a pretty impressive one. So it's been an unbelievable time frame so far, and extremely humbled to be able to have volleyball as kind of the source of our family and a big part of it. I mean, our girls have grown up in ball carts, and we've done the whole club volleyball thing and brought them along and kind of passed them around to parents. So it's just part of who we are and our family, and couldn't be more thankful and excited about where we are now and looking forward to the future.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I mean, it's cool to hear your journey. And one thing, we wanted to ask you is, when did you realize you wanted to get involved in coaching?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll give you as quick as I can. I know sometimes I get a little long-winded in my answers here, but so I'm down in Santa Barbara. I was playing golf, and I had to work that night. It started about 5:00, and I get a call from Joe Wortman probably around 3 or so, and I didn't even know who it was. It was a 209 number, and I'm like, who's calling me from 209? And Joe Wortman calls me up and says, hey, I've got a assistant coaching position, and just curious if that's something that you'd be interested in. Until that point, Kevin, honestly, I didn't even think about being a college volleyball coach, or a coach at all, for that matter. It's really the genesis, if you will, of a random phone call on like a random Tuesday or Wednesday that I thought about for a couple of days, and called Joe back and just said, yeah, I'm in. It's kind of a leap of faith, if you will. Without really knowing. I mean, that's obviously going back to UOP, there was a lot of familiarity with that and just being in the area. And obviously the guys in the team, I think I actually played with at least one class, or maybe even two classes, that were still there when I came back as a coach. So, really just kind of looking at it. And what I liked when I first got into it, honestly, was there was this combination of two things. One, you're involved in sport. And I think if you are growing up and you play a lot of sports, it's just part of who you are. I mean, you like to compete, you like to play games, whatever that happens to be, basketball, tennis, ping pong, whatever. But the part that I started really getting kind of attached to with the guys early on was this concept of just being a teacher and being someone who could help other people try to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. And so there was a lot of similarities between being, a high school or college professor or an educator of some sort. And I kind of just looked at it and went, wow, you can do both of these things kind of at the same time. Not going to lie too, the hours and the seasons and all that kind of stuff, not bad. You got some mandatory days off. You've got some dead periods where you can't go recruits. You got your season, obviously. But there's some time in there to kind of have a life as well. And so, that was, it was a good lifestyle, if you will, at least for me when I was in my kind of early mid-20s. I think I was probably 24, maybe 23, 24, somewhere around there. So, just being in the area and kind of knowing everybody from Stockton and obviously being back up in Northern California was a draw for me as well, just because I had a lot of my friends that were graduating. I had some buddies up in Davis and Chico and, some Northern California colleges. So in some ways it kind of brought me home, and it was kind of a good introduction into the volleyball world, just to, go to tournaments and stand next to coaches like Al Skates and, Don Shaw when he moved over to the men's with Stanford, and, just kind of get a feel for, all these other coaches that you've always either played against or played on opposite teams. But to all of a sudden now just to start having dialogue with them and to learn from them and to just kind of pick up every little, comment or philosophy or just tidbit of information in there, because you start to, create those relationships with other coaches because you're around them a lot. So it really kind of helped me go from the kind of player perspective into the, okay, this is more to what's going on here. And then being able to try that out with Joe and the men's team and, have that as kind of a little laboratory to, go to Joe. I was out at Colorado Springs for a couple of weeks with the national team, I think before the 2004 Olympics, and had some coaches. Carl McGowan, who was at BYU, who recruited me, was an assistant coach there. And that's actually where I met Rob Browning for the first time. He was one of the assistants. So, my little path when I went from UOP to Santa Clara, Rob got hired as the women's head coach at St. Mary's, and I was already living here in San Ramon at the time. And it was a pretty easy connection for me just to at least introduce myself again and apply for the job, and was fortunate that Rob hired me as an assistant coach. And that was really my kind of first deep dive, if you will, into the women's side in terms of being an assistant coach and not just a volunteer who's kind of showing up and helping out where I needed to be and, whatever that staff needed me to kind of take care of. So really, again, had a large learning curve with Rob, and to have someone like him and his experience. I think at the time he'd been to at least 3, and I think he's been to 4 Olympics now as some sort of assistant coach or on staff with the men's national team. So, I mean, he's one of the coaches that I will say probably has had the most impact on me in my coaching career. And then our ability just as a staff to be able to win a WCC conference title, I think it was 2009, really just kind of put the exclamation that, yeah, this works. Like, there's not really one formula that you can just go by, but there are concepts, there are principles. There's a lot. What I actually have kind of learned over time, I would say, to kind of tangent for a second, is he taught me that there's a lot more than just to the X's and O's. I mean, I think kind of every young coach, at least from my experience, that comes in is always looking at it kind of like a video game. Like, it's really easy to kind of, all we have to do is this and do this well. And the challenge is that we're all dealing with humans, and they're not always going to be perfect. And you gotta add in, not just the knowledge of the game or scouting reports or things of that nature, but also the mental, psychological side of confidence and, where is your team, or where are these players, and where's your leadership, and the dynamic of the individual group is something that I learned with Rob that just was cemented in my kind of coaching philosophy. And it's really kind of just stuck with me. I don't think it's ever going to be something that leaves me. And, as you start to hire and go through transitions with your own staff or with recruiting, the ability to kind of find the little gems in there, or the needle in the haystack, if you will, of she may not be where she can be right now, but there's some intangibles in this person who stick out a lot more than potentially other recruits. And, those are the kids that I think are, for whatever reason, and there are lots, but the kids that can come in and take on these challenges, because it's not easy. I mean, everybody in all these conferences across the country, if you're playing Division I volleyball, every team has talent, and every team is capable of beating your team. I mean, one of the big sayings that I've had for a while now is just, you have to respect the game, because if you don't respect the game will beat you by itself. You can't overestimate anybody. You can't underestimate anybody, because you still have to go out and execute and perform. So just really a large kind of growth from from Joe Wortman, and like I said, from John Wallace, Rob Browning, and then Rich Feller, just with my couple of years at Cal, just, making that transition from a mid-major, so to speak, to a Power 5 conference. And then seeing all these recruits at the time, like Alex Kleinman and Joanna Evans at Stanford, and, a lot of the kind of the Olympians that we had about 4 years ago, maybe 2 Olympics ago or so. But now all of a sudden you're sitting on the sidelines with your team looking across going, how are we going to beat these girls? And, at the same time being able to kind of have the keys to the car at Cal to kind of run an offense and a defense. So, that was to some degree kind of my favorite year, not because we played in the national finals, but just to be able to kind of have that experience with Rob and then go to another location and try to get a little bit more feedback, if you will, that what you're doing, how you're trying to play the game, the style that you want to play with, etc., can work, and it can work at various levels. And then to try to transition that down to Cal Poly and kind of go through that rebuild again, if you will. And obviously, the last couple of years there, we were rolling really well and had a really good culture and some really unbelievable, talented volleyball players. So looking forward to it again. And the challenge in front of us is just to, one day better is our mantra. It's a concept that one of our sports psychologists named Jeff Charoche, who I met actually as an assistant at Cal, but worked with him a lot at Cal Poly. And when I got my master's degree, it was in sports psychology. So he was a real easy kind of conversationalist for me just to bounce ideas off of. And sometimes he would actually have to kind of center me a little bit more because I get some ideas in my head that were, a little bit out there to try some things. And so again, he's another person that has been with me almost 10 years now in various ways and capacities, whether it's myself or working with the teams that I've been coaching. But I really have been gravitating, I wouldn't say more right now, but just into that concept of team dynamic and how this group, the organizational structure, the principles that we want to abide by in terms of our culture, and then setting boundaries with the players. And when we have a term that we use at Cal and we use at Poly as well, we call it the inside the bubble and outside the bubble. To really kind of solidify our group to know that, we have to commit to one another, whether or not we trust it, because if we're uncommitted, it's going to leave some holes kind of in our armor, if you will. And once players started to kind of understand that and grasp it, so at some point it's kind of like you just kind of get out of your own way and just let them go out and execute and learn and try to get some of your younger players on the court as best you can so that they can get some experience so that when they're juniors and seniors, they can turn into those leaders. Because every year at this level and at college and also with club, but maybe not to the same level. But every year is a new group. You lose seniors, you get freshmen. And especially when you're kind of in your first couple of years at any program, there's always kind of a learning curve going on, mainly because, pretty much my entire roster in 2019 here at Cal were all kids that were already here. And so there's a real different dynamic to that, in my opinion, because they chose to go to Cal because of obviously the school and the academics, but they also went there because of the coaching staff and the players on the team and those, perspectives as well. So it's been great. I think the girls at Cal have been phenomenal. They're really, grasping the concepts. They're intellectual. They ask questions. And they're starting to realize that, I'm not such a big, scary bad guy after all, and not just a robot, even though sometimes it gets a little emotional out there because it gets competitive. But I think the biggest thing that they've really kind of hopefully seen early on is just the willingness for myself and the staff just to support them and to, be somebody who's not just the taskmaster in the gym, but also cares about what's going on, in their academic world, in their, not so much with their social lives outside the bubble stuff, but to really create those relationships with the players so that they feel like this is a place where I can be myself and kind of reduce the judgment, reduce, what we kind of think of one another, and just commit to trying to be the best versions of ourselves and go out every day and just try to give your best effort and learn and try to improve without a timeline of when that's going to happen. Because every year we're going to be trying to bring in kids who are helping our program from a talent perspective. So it's really just trying to provide opportunities for our players to be able to compete and kind of let the cream rise to the top, with the players' ability, and try to give the players as much accountability as possible. And I think when players feel like they are part of the process, it really kind of gravitates them into kind of this snowball effect. And all of a sudden it starts rolling and snow starts getting on it and it starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, that's just, we're kind of at the infantile stage right now. But like I said, I'm excited with who we have and recruits we have coming in. And it's going to be a challenge, but one that I know our group's going to be prepared for.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I can think back to when, I was playing for you at Pacific, that I know you and Joe both did a great job of kind of building a culture. And, I definitely saw players have a trust in you. And so as a freshman, it was easy to know I could come to you with questions, concerns. And then also it was genuine because we knew we were going to get a straight answer, even if we didn't necessarily like what it was all the time. I mean, men's game's a little different than recruiting. Obviously at Cal, there were certainly players on that team, myself included, that, we weren't going to see the court, unless we really stuck with it for probably a few years. And again, I think it was nice to have somebody who was going to be honest with the players that were in that situation, rather than try and make us feel better about it and then, constantly feel like we're at the end of the bench when we're not there. So, I think that's a great thing that you were doing then, and it sounds like you've been able to translate it over to, a different level and a different, obviously a different game in a lot of ways with some new teams. You mentioned during this COVID time, it's kind of a rough time. You're definitely new there, and so how have you been trying to kind of continually prepare your team, keep them engaged? Let them know that you're there and you're kind of fighting for getting them back on the court, as soon as you can.
Yeah, we've had kind of a couple of go-arounds at this. If we go kind of from middle of March until May, when graduation and school ends, and then obviously the start of summer, and just with COVID, we didn't have camps. Our players are usually at Cal around for the summer, just because it's another semester, if you will, or a block of time that they can take classes. And then we were gearing up in kind of middle of July, just kind of waiting to get the green light to come in. And then all of a sudden we get the red light that no one's coming in. And so we transitioned, I'd say probably around the end of August, kind of when school started, to set up what we looked at as kind of our entire fall on the calendar, just to see like, what can we do? What areas can we still improve with our group? Obviously a big component of that is we were not able to be obviously in person with them. We weren't in a gym with them. Not many of them at the time even had access to a volleyball court indoors. So, we really had to kind of transition from a skill set, from a systems, volleyball was almost kind of just put on the back burner. And so we spent this last semester really, again, one of my ideas that my staff didn't shoot down. So apparently it was okay with them, but we've actually spent this entire semester providing them with different sources of perspectives. And so what we set up was team Zooms. We actually had one this morning. This is our 9th week. Next week is our final week. So we're almost at the end here. Every week we're meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays for an hour. We have a separate Zoom meeting with just our 6 freshmen on Wednesdays, just because we wanted to be able to kind of give them a little bit of volleyball. So we're doing some screen sharing and some online with volumetrics and kind of going through our offensive and defensive systems. Some of our technical stuff, even though we know they can't really, get into a gym to practice those things. But just to start getting the vocabulary, the concepts, the things that are kind of like, hey, in Cal's gym, we don't want to ever do this, right? Just some of those things that you kind of learn your first kind of week or so in the gym when you get to a new place. Crosson's list of never do this. Down the line wide is something that if you ask an outside hitter at Cal right now, what's one of Crosson's big no-nos? I guarantee you that's probably one of them. But anyway, we kind of went into a little more of the connection of the players, kind of a deep dive into self, but also just our relationships with one another. And so what we did is we came up with a list of about 5 or 6 different movies, and a weekly song, brought to you by yours truly here, which obviously I'm probably dating myself a little bit with what my musical genres are like compared to our roster. But a fair amount of classic rock. Movies such as Fight Club, Moneyball. The one we just did was Hidden Figures. Some of the songs that we had them listen to. Stairway to Heaven, If 6 Were 9 by Jimi Hendrix, Touch of Grey by the Grateful Dead. And honestly, I didn't have this planned, but along with all that was going on just in our country at the time too, kind of after June and the social justice push, and Cal's a big, social justice campus. But a lot of these things in terms of the musical stuff really kind of had a connection to, obviously back in the 60s with what was going on with, all kind of the counterculture and, artists like, Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix and some of the songs we're listening to. It was interesting to kind of hear these ladies kind of talk about, what they pulled, particularly what messages did they hear. And it was an interesting experiment, to be honest. I didn't really know how it would turn out. It's not something I've ever done before. But it really had, I think, a positive impact on our group. I think it kind of opened all of our eyes, myself included, to actually be around, even if it's just for an hour, but to listen to some of these players talk about, how these songs made them feel, what they heard in terms of messages, what were the messages of the movies. And I tasked them really with trying to kind of conglom those two things. Like when you watch Fight Club, what speaks to you there, but also what can you tangent or what can you draw from Fight Club that would be applicable to us as a volleyball program, or specific songs, if you will. So it was really an awesome kind of time frame. And honestly, it's one where, you don't obviously get a lot of time with these players, especially at Cal, right? My first year, just because they come in the morning, we have practice up until about 11:30, 12. And then they've got their full academic load, which for a lot of them is pretty long in the day. So we don't have, obviously we're in the office, or when we were, players would stop by. Haas is not really located in a central on-campus location. So the concept of having time around these players when you're not like on a road trip, for example, and to hear them almost like in a classroom setting, just kind of speak freely and feel like they're in a safe space to just be able to voice their opinions and perspectives with no judgment, and to say, this is how it made me feel, or this is what I pulled from this, and this is how I think this can tie into us being a better group, if you will. And so a lot of that's just kind of what we've been working on. I think it's given, obviously for me, it's given me a lot of insight into the players, just kind of outside the volleyball perspective. And, you hear concepts here and there, which also kind of reverb for us or reconfirm for us as a staff. It's like, okay, yeah, you're getting it. Like, you don't have it all yet, but what I hear from you, you're starting to connect some dots that are going to kind of lead you over here. And those are the things that I think, it's kind of the silver lining, if you will, or the touch of gray here, no pun intended. But to really have this time to do that, we wouldn't have this opportunity, right? I mean, we would be in the gym and we'd be grinding practices, and it'd be about performance and mental training and nutrition and academics and all that kind of stuff. But it's been a real kind of blessing to some degree to be able to kind of have these personal times. And we're going to wrap up next week with individual meetings with every player just before they start hitting finals, and just check in with them and then kind of cut them loose for the month of December, and then report back after Christmas and get ready for spring. So, hopefully the the info, the captains meetings. We have 2 senior captains right now. They've had nothing but really good things to say about what we've been doing. So the feedback so far has been really positive, and I'm just thankful that, like I said, my assistant coaches and staff didn't just kind of shoot me down to begin with, because otherwise we'd have a hard time kind of filling the programming for the last 10 or so weeks. So it's been an awesome opportunity.
That's really cool to hear, Coach. And it's very unique, because sometimes when you do these interviews, you hear very similar answers, which isn't bad. I think sometimes coaches steal ideas, but I think it's just so fitting for at the university you're at. And I think it speaks to your character that you kind of went out on a limb, and it sounds like it really is working in your bubble, like you like to say. So I kind of have a 2-part question for you. And all coaches do it differently. You notice Coach Wortman, and I noticed how he did it is he would generally call his guy, say, I want you, fly him up there, and then, interview him. But it was like, you're my guy, you're going to be my assistant. I've seen you do it at 2 programs where I've seen you keep an assistant on staff, and you did that at Cal, and then you did that at Cal Poly. And then I've also seen you hire some coaches. So can you go through the process for the viewers and us, how you hire a coach? And then why do you keep those coaches on staff? Why did you keep those 2 that you have done in the past?
Yeah. Great questions, Kevin. Well, we're going through a hire right now because one of our assistants has recently moved on. So we're going to start the process again here at Cal. We already have started. He's going to finish up next week. So in terms of your first question, hiring assistant coaches, I think, is one of, I don't know how many there are, but it is one of the quintessential things that a head coach can do. I learned that at Poly, getting down there. But the ability to put someone inside your most inner circle. I mean, there's 3 of us. And at Cal, we have a director of ops, Betsy Sedlak. She's amazing. And so right now we have 4. But that group is really, the figurehead, if you will, of just any program. They're the ones who are assisting with various roles and responsibilities. So part of the hiring process, at least for me, is to try to figure out, okay, I have this assistant. At Cal Poly, as an example, Caroline Walters had been there as a previous assistant coach and a interim head coach for a few months when she took over. I kept her on staff for a few reasons. One, I'd already known her previously. She was actually a freshman libero on the 2004 Santa Clara team. Her uncle actually was the basketball coach at SoCal High School, who I played against in high school basketball. So there was a really small connection there with her. But the thing that I knew that I wanted and needed to have was somebody with such the experience at that institution already. The volleyball side of things is, everyone's got their own ideas. Everyone has their way that they want to play, that they want to train, this technique versus this technique, et cetera, et cetera. But what I wanted to have, and the same with Cal, and keeping Jen, who did the same thing that Caroline did. She was an assistant coach. She was actually the director of ops in 2010 at Cal. And so over 10 years, she went from ops to assistant to interim head coach to now associate head coach with me. And both of them at those respective institutions had been there. I think Caroline had been there for 7 or 8. I think Jen's been at Cal now for 10 or 12, maybe even 13 years. I may be aging her, so sorry, Jen, if I did a little bit. But at the same time, having somebody who knows all the intricacies of how that university operates, what the admissions process is like, what the academic structure is like, local things, where to eat, where you want to live, some of those things as well. But there's a real big comfort level for me having somebody with that type of background, just knowledge of a place and a location. And so if there are questions that come up, and usually it happens more kind of in the first couple of years where it's like, what's the minimum criteria I need to get into Cal Poly? That's a Caroline question, so I'm going to have Caroline give you a call. So there are some things, obviously, that's a learning curve for me to kind of go through as I get kind of inundated into these schools, and, you know, how to go through the admissions process, how to do the applications, how to, you know, help out with housing and where do we want recruits living, and just all the ins and outs of how these institutions operate or how these athletic departments operate was just for me, you know, almost a non-negotiable. It was like, gosh, you're really good at this, and you know, you're great in the gym, and the gym was probably the last thing at the time that I was most concerned with. It was more just having someone there, and it also gives the players that are in the program, I think, a fair amount of stability too, because there's going to be an unknown with this new person who comes into the gym and who's now running this program. And so in that transition period before, you know, quote unquote, your own players start to show up, even the returning players still know that they have. And so there's, I think, a little bit more of a trust that comes earlier on, because it's like, okay, if Caroline trusts this guy, I trust Caroline, so therefore I think this guy can be trustworthy as well. Or maybe that's at Cal. Jen's here, I trust Jen. She's, you know, so to speak, vouching for this person. Obviously, my day-to-day interactions are speaking volumes to them as well, but to have some continuity in the staff is also, I think, something that's really beneficial. So in the hiring process, to me, it really comes down to what are all three of us? What's our combination that works well for us? Are we, as an example, now at Cal, Jen has been a primary recruiter for us because she's been there for a while. So she's got a lot of that kind of feel for the school and just a really kind of an encyclopedia of answers. Both her and I now have kids, so it's a little bit more of a challenge for us during the springtime to kind of go out and all of a sudden, you know, fly around the country on any given day and maximize our eval days, if you will. And then there becomes the other side of that, which is you can either kind of go the route of primary recruiter as an assistant coach, or you're going probably the other route, which is technical coordinator or some kind of trainer in the gym with some specificity there, whether it's a position specific that, let's say, I don't necessarily have such an in-depth kind of history with. You know, I'll be the first to tell you, it's like I'm an average middle blocker coach, as an example. Can I coach middles? Sure. I can, you know, teach you the footwork, and here's the movements, and this is the visual sequence, and here's how we want you to transition, and we're going to go do these things. Coming to Cal and having Amir here, he was a middle blocker at Long Beach State, played professionally in Europe for a couple of years, but really had such a larger, knowledge base, if you will, of just the real specifics of the position. And so there was a learning curve for me, and he and I spent, a fair amount of time in the office, especially when I got here, just kind of going, okay, here's what I know. Here's what I like. What can you do that's different? How can you be additive to this? And someone like Amir took my, what probably seemed like a very analog and outdated way of training middles and went, okay, I see your jack and your queen, and I will trump you with the ace and the king here. And we should add this, this, and this onto what you're already doing. And then showed me some video of that, and then showed me some stats of that, and then, presented it in a way that made sense to me. And it was like, Amir, they're all yours. You got them. So I'm going to go take outsides and leads, and Jen, you've got the setters, and here we go. So that's kind of how, that kind of took shape. But now that Amir's leaving, Jen and I are now trying to figure out what's best for us in terms of how do we replace someone of Amir's capability as a coach, as Amir's character, as his relationship with the players in terms of the rapport that he has with them, specifically with those middles. Now, I don't know if that's something that we're going to look at and go, we just want to try to find someone who can come in and do those same things. Or maybe Jen and I kind of reorg ourselves in terms of what we do. My kids are getting older, so maybe I'm going to be more of the recruiter, in which case I would look for someone who's more of an on-court trainer, and maybe not necessarily a specialist, but somebody who can almost run a gym, kind of like I did with Cal in 2010. Because my job now at Cal, there's just more time in other areas. areas like compliance, areas like fundraising, things that I maybe did at Poly, but maybe didn't do or need to do at kind of the level that I need to do at Cal. So it's really trying to find people, that first and foremost that you feel comfortable with. And second, that can take on these responsibilities at the level that you want in terms of what your expectations are. And so that's the challenge with the hiring process is just making sure that you're doing the diligence on, trying to find out as much as you can about candidates and kind of going through the interview process and kind of giving them some tasks to see how they, give us a scouting report. What would it be like for you on the road? How do you decipher, a recruit being better, let's say, than another recruit? So it's a little stressful at times because obviously you're trying to welcome someone into a program that you feel is kind of your baby, if you will, and you're very protective of it. But at the same time, I know that we're going to find somebody who's going to come in and really help us. And that concept of having someone who's new as well, opens a lot of possibilities. And there's nothing to say that we aren't going to be even better. Not that, we obviously don't want to get rid of Amir, but it was a good opportunity for him to kind of take the next step in his career. And as a head coach, that at some point, assistant coaches want to become head coaches. And part of my job is to help them understand that and to promote them and to, give them as many different responsibilities so that when they go someplace else, they have experience in budget operations and how to manage a budget. All the kind of the interdepartmental workings, so to speak. Which every department has goods and bads. But trying to learn the landscape other than just, okay, you have middle blockers, go coach. But to give them kind of a sprinkling of all the criteria that it takes to run a Division I Power 5 school like Cal, so that when they make that next jump, they feel comfortable and confident that they've gotten some experience during their time at Cal to be prepared to make that next transitional move.
You talked a lot about your family and, I think a lot of coaches out there, we love getting out and coaching, but it is hard to balance that time with family and with recruiting or, game times are usually not at the best time to involve family. So what are some of the things that you do in order to ensure that you're getting some of that family time and balancing it out with, with the passion of coaching and running a good program?
And you guys are good at this. Some great questions you got here.
We're trying.
That's another tough one, Miles. The first answer that comes to mind is it's 100% because of my wife. The amount of just, I'll call it stuff, whether it's time away from home because you're recruiting or you're on the road, whether it's just the mental grind of coming home after losses. There's also the thrill of coming home after victories. And obviously, Courtney and the girls are at as many games as they can be. So, the home games after, some solid victories here and there are always a little bit more enjoyable to be able to experience. And having our girls basically kind of inundated with the players as much as possible also kind of helps as well. I mean, we've had girls at Poly and even ones here at Cal who babysit for us. And our girls, they've got their old Cal Poly T-shirts they wear around and wear to bed, and they still, ask about some of the Cal Poly players, and they're starting to kind of learn and meet the Cal players as well, and being around them. But I'd say first and foremost, it's having a spouse who understands and accepts probably more than anything of what this profession is like. At least for me as her husband. I'll tell you right now, Miles, I'm not always the best at it. It's hard sometimes, when you come home and early on, I think it was easier just because they're so young and cute. And, it's like, oh, this is just taking me mentally away from all these things. And then when the kids go to bed and you've got that time to kind of go back and look at video and you're just taking notes and writing down this just laundry list of all these things you see that you want to get better at. And, just kind of the day-to-day stresses and strains, if you will, of just, being a head coach. And that's that's one of the things I'll give credit to a guy named Ruben Volta, who's the head coach at Sac State, who was a head coach a year or two before I was. And he said, Sammy, I'll tell you this, I don't care how ready you think you are, no one's ever prepared to make that one move from assistant seat on the bench to head coach seat on the bench. It's only one chair, but it changes everything. And so, you know, kind of having these coaches and colleagues and friends, you know, some of my best friends are all college coaches, but to really kind of hear their experiences and to be at some place like Santa Clara and even St. Mary's. I mean, both John and Rob both have families. So really I had some coaches who were already kind of in that realm as I kind of came up, even before I had kids, to kind of see. We had McKenna when I was at St. Mary's, and Rob Browning honestly was like, she was born in May, and he said, you know, Sam, we'll see you after summer camp for August. Like, it was like, don't even come to, like, family is the number one thing right now, and you need to be there. So, I mean, I've just been fortunate to have coaches who have experienced those things and, you know, kind of helped me, maybe not so much verbally, but just in their, you know, daily interactions and just kind of my vision and seeing them with their families and knowing that you can do it. But it's not easy. I can tell you that. Like I said, I'm thankful and obviously in love with my wife for being able to allow me to have what she calls a hobby as a career. So anyway, it's an awesome thing. And McKenna's now not old enough. She's playing on a 13 and under team. Somehow got kind of swindled into coaching my daughter. So I'm one of those parents now. But it's given us some time to kind of, you know, be in the car ride to practice together and actually coach her a little bit. And, you know, it's a trip to kind of look at pictures and realize that, you know, not too long ago they were in strollers and ball carts, and now all of a sudden they're in middle school. It's just amazing how fast time flies. So really just thankful, Miles, more than anything, to have a family that's been appreciative and has allowed me and accepted me to be in the profession that I am.
Yeah, it does go by fast. I mean, it wasn't that many years ago. I was volunteering actually for Kevin a few practices, and I was dragging my boys along, one in a stroller and one just kind of wandering the gym. And yeah, it's definitely different when they're small and cute and they're just kind of happy to be with you versus now. I mean, they're a little older and they kind of need and want more out of you, or they want to go do something else. And so yeah, definitely having you know, spouses that are willing to allow us to do this is definitely a special thing.
Yeah, that was great to hear about your work-life balance, because I've been fortunate for some of my best friends have worked for you, and I've talked to some of your student athletes now that live in San Diego. They're working at Wave, and it seems to me that you have a really good work-life balance in the sense where I've worked for other people that it's really intense and they grind, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I really admire that there seems to be a balance, but you could also be like, well, so Coach Crosson wins a lot and he's still winning at a really high clip, and he's producing really good student athletes. So it seems like you've got that balance, a good thing going. You know, one of the questions I have for you is, you know, the obvious is, you know, Berkley is one of the best institutions in the country. It's a public school, arguably the best public school in the country. Obviously, when you're looking at a recruit, you want them to touch a certain height and hit the ball hard. I get that. But what's something, if I was a recruit watching and being like, you know, I really like Cal, seems like Coach Crosson's going to be there for a while. What is something that jumps out at you when you're in Kansas at JO's and you watch a kid and you're like, ooh, that's good. I'm going to put an asterisk next to this kid's name. What are some of the things you look for?
Yeah, that's a good one as well. It's going to sound a little cliche-ish, but listening to Rob Brown at St. Mary's, I mean, this was one of the first, you know, when I first got to St. Mary's, you walk in the gym. Of course, most schools have, at least at St. Mary's and Cal Poly, they've got banners of every other school in the conference hanging so that you can see these are all the WCC teams or these are all the Big West teams. And so when I first got there, you walk in the gym and, you know, at the time it was San Diego and Pepperdine because BYU wasn't part of the conference yet. And so when you're out recruiting, You start seeing, we just had, National Signing Day started yesterday. So you're starting to see all these kids, sign their letters and commit to their schools. Of course, in volleyball, these kids have been committed for at least probably a year, if not longer, although now they've changed the rules in the last few years to having contact with no one until their junior year, so to speak. So one of the biggest things that he kind of instilled in me when we'd go out and watch is that ultimately what we're looking for, Sam, as he would say it, is we're looking for volleyball players. And I know that sounds really kind of like, well, duh. But what it really meant was you're looking for all-around players, because the game of volleyball, we like to believe that we know what's going to happen, but at some point it's going to be random. And so when the random things show up, which is probably a lot, do we have skilled enough players who are also playing at a physical level that at least meets somewhat of a minimum criteria? And so you start looking at these players that I've coached. I'll give you a few examples. We had a lefty who was about 6 feet, not very athletic. She was probably touching 9'4", 9'5" on a good day. So she didn't jump very well. She wasn't overly quick. Her arm was okay at best, but she knew when she attacked how to generate kills. It wasn't about how hard she needed to hit it. We didn't need to get on her about, hey, you need to work on your strength or, hitting the ball harder. We actually just spent more time in other areas. So she would go up there and, chisel ball off the block. She would roll shot over for a kill. She'd put a little, extra little thumb on it to hit a little bit more inside angle playing opposite. We won the conference with a 5'9" outside hitter who was probably touching 9'7", 9'8", and a couple of middle blockers who, were very good blockers, but not overly offensive. And so it's a kind of a combination. One is you start to watch long enough to watch enough random things to see, okay, the obvious things that we see right now are X. Those things could be she's tall, physical attributes. She jumps really well. She's overly athletic. She's got a rocket of an arm like a Mima Merkovich, for example. I mean, Mima is an undersized outside for the Pac-12. 5'10" on a good day. But as Keegan Cook, who's now at Washington, who was a student manager for us at St. Mary's, and I've known him since he was in college. One of his great lines that I always will remember is, good things happen when you hit the ball hard. So there are some physical attributes, I'd say, Kevin, but there's nothing that I would look at and say that you have to have this. There's no X factor for me. I don't really have a preference, if you will, between a 6'3" outside and a 5'11" outside. The question is going to be, can the 5'11" outside generate high ball kills at the same effectiveness that the 6'3" player can? Are they a blocking liability because they're smaller? If they are a blocking liability, how good is their serve receive and defense? So there's other areas. Can they set a second ball? Can they play a ball out of the net? I mean, these little things that happen in a volleyball game that sometimes can be things that coaches just kind of gravitate towards. And I think you kind of see that if you look around at the Pac-12 conference and the way that a lot of these teams in our conference are structured or kind of been built, if you will. Certain teams kind of get a brand for, oh, this team's strengths are going to be this. This team's strengths are going to be blocking at the net. They're all 6'5". They've got just a really tall, front row team and a bunch of little libero DSs in the back row. That was probably one of the quintessential things of Penn State in 2010 when we played them in the finals. I think across the front row, I don't think they had a player shorter than 6'4". And in the back row, I don't think they had a player taller than 5'7". So looking at that going, you got enough subs. One of the things I think that kind of gets a rap, at least in women's volleyball, is this concept of specificity, where it's like, if you're a middle, you're only a middle, and you're never going to be anything else besides a middle. A lot of schools kind of morphed into taking middle blockers in club and trying to convert them to outsides or opposites. Another change in that potential as well came with the inundation of being able to use your hands and serve receive. So you didn't have to necessarily have platform passers all the time. So if you were looking at like a prototypical Crosson recruit, if you will, it's probably like a 6 foot, 6'1" outside who, could play 2.5 hours of indoor volleyball in the morning and then go up to the beach courts and be a phenomenal beach partner because they just have the skill sets to be able to play volleyball. I'll give credit here. I take a hard look at Dan Fisher at Pitt. Really architected a team with a bunch of good kind of 6 foot, 6'2" athletes, but that understand how to play at the tempo and how to have middle blockers who can set killable balls and, how to make adjustments and how to, create that culture on the group. And ultimately, kind of circling back to Rob, I remember an infamous, it's one of these things that you just kind of get stuck with, but we were kind of our second or third year, we're down at Long Beach State for a preseason tournament. Long Beach, of course, at the time with Jim Olaro's got a bunch of just gnarly athletes. I mean, they're touching 10-4, 10-6. I think maybe we had one player who touched 10 feet. So we're in the locker room, little coaches, hour before the game, little chalk talk. We're going to cover the scouting report. And Rob kind of looks at the team and he goes, ladies, when we go out for warm-ups, we're going to lose. I'll just tell you right now, this team's going to go out there and they're going to put on a highlight reel when it comes to warm-ups. These middles are going to be up there just bouncing balls to the 10-foot line. They got a couple of 6'2" outsides who are just hammering balls. And we're going to go out there and kind of look, how we look. Same thing happened 2009, that conference title team. We beat Santa Barbara in the first round at Stanford and then played Stanford in the second round. I think Stanford, I can't remember if that was Kleinman's year, but again, they had, Faluke was a middle on that team, just a bunch of All-Americans and same kind of concepts. And we ended up losing 15-12 in the fifth. And if you had polled the fans in the stands for warm-ups and said, okay, what's your prediction based on what you see in warmups? I mean, I even would have said it was probably going to be a 3-0 beatdown. But at the same time, when you can get players who are skilled, players who understand how to make adjustments quickly, and a collective group of players who are willing to fight for one another, now you've got a recipe for being able to beat more talented teams. The saying, and I'm not too sure I'll get it correct, but it's, talent or hard work beats talent unless talent works hard. So there is no substitute for hard work and being, surrounding yourself with players who are willing to put that work in. And I think that's one of the things, when you go out, like you said, if I'm in the middle of Kansas and I'm watching a kid play, physically, she may be a no-brainer. But when you're playing against SC, Stanford, Washington, Utah, they have physical players too. So the difference for me really comes more down to what's in between the ears. How much is this player going to be willing to go into an environment where they're no longer going to be the big fish in the pond? They're going to get some humble pie a la mode, so to speak. And when they get that first, the Mike Tyson saying, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Well, a lot of freshmen in the Pac-12 get punched in the face. So it's not so much that's going to happen. It's what's going to happen with them after that happens. And that, for me, is kind of the separator, if you will. And that comes from, at the moment, phone calls, Zooms, any opportunity we can to kind of talk with these recruits, to learn more about them and to ask some of these kind of tougher questions. You can change how a person passes. You can change, a potential arm swing. It's incredibly difficult to change a person. And so, and ultimately, and not to say that there aren't just a lot of great people out there, but there are intangibles and personal characteristics and, that grit and that just fight and that just resilience that you're looking for. Kevin, to use the two that I think you're mentioning down there in San Diego right now is Adley Van Winden and Catherine Broker. I mean, if I had a pick of my all Crosson who you've coached team, there'd be one outside and one libero right there that I for sure would be signing up for my team, because those girls are just the epitome of, I just want to be on a court with people who are going to just battle with me. And it's not always going to be pretty, and I'm not always going to play my best, but I will guarantee you that I'm going to be in the trench with you, and we're going to battle through this. So really that combination of all those things, athletic ability, skill set, academics, obviously, and then the fourth kind of pillar for us is what we just label as that intangible, that interpersonal characteristics that make up that player. And is that a good fit for us at Cal as we go through the recruiting process?
I think that's a great thing for a lot of high school girls who are looking at college, to hear that from a high level coach. I mean, even if they're not going to end up at even a Division I school, I think so many girls that I've been around, at least at the high school level, they start counting themselves out pretty early on if they're not quite tall enough, if they don't think they quite fit. And there's a lot of, I don't know if Kevin's seen it too, but there's a lot of high school and club coaches that kind of give them that feeling as well. Like, well, you don't quite fit the prototypical outside, so I can't put you there.
Yeah.
And same thing, I've been around girls, like you said, if you walked in the gym and you just saw them walking around in their uniform, you'd be like, oh, I should probably go find where that girl's going to play. But then you watch them play and you kind of go, I just don't see it. I don't see the drive.
Yeah.
Maybe they put on a good show in warmups, but then they're out there and they're just not fighting with their teammates. So, those intangibles definitely are important. Do you think starting off at Pacific, where, I don't know, I mean, we kind of had to fight for, I don't want to knock anybody that went there, because we certainly ended up with some good teams and some great players, and there's a lot of great coaches. But, I mean, Joe wasn't going to be able to recruit, the same kids as Long Beach State or UCLA or BYU. Do you think, part of that groomed you into the coach you are, and being able to try and, just find the intangibles from each person on your team and while recruiting?
Miles, it's a great question. I think if I really was to do a deep dive on it, I would say absolutely yes. I think having my first coaching job, if you will, in kind of I kind of classify it as you're kind of the permanent underdog. No one really expects you to be number one in the country, just because of the things you mentioned, whether it's recruiting, obviously in men's volleyball too. And this is something that really just, can frustrate a lot of people when you're in these positions, is that in men's volleyball, there's also the financial component, right? So if Long Beach State is offering a 50% scholarship and UOP is offering a 50% scholarship, that ain't the same amount of dollars to go to college. So you really had to kind of figure out how to, navigate the scholarship route as well, unlike in women's volleyball, at least, where it's just all or nothing. But absolutely, Miles, the concept that, I don't want to say forever underdog, because obviously those teams that were successful, when Thomas is there and Nils and Martin and, the Norwegians were there, and Vlade, those guys, constantly looking at just going out and trying to prove yourself. And that's I think something that for sure, I think is a gravitational pull, and to be able to kind of see that transition of success, going to the other schools that I went to, St. Mary's obviously was kind of the same thing. Cal Poly, kind of the same thing. Cal, I think at least from where they were when I left to where they kind of went during the time that I was at Poly, probably you could classify that as the same thing. We're not exactly walking around, the Pac-12 right now going, hey, we're better than you and we know it. We're going around going, hey, this is our opportunity to show what we've been doing. And to take that on. And even at Poly, for me, it was, I think it was 17 was the first year we won the conference title. And then, then once you do it, the landscape changes a little bit, because now you can do it. And this is what you hear this growing up all the time. And I remember being a kid watching, the Lakers Celtics in the early 80s, and Riley and Casey Jones, and, the concept of repeating as champions. Phil Jackson with the Bulls, as an example, in the 90s with Michael Jordan. it's one thing to do it the first time. It's a whole nother ball of wax to try to do it the second time, because when you do it the second time, everybody's gunning for you. So you're no longer the hunter, you're now the huntee. So, after we kind of climbed the first mountain, which was, ladies, we got to figure out how we're going to beat Hawaii, 2017, we finally accomplished that. And then that gave us and gave the players that kind of mental springboard to look at it and go, okay, we now know we can. It's not a matter of we hope we can. We've earned the right to be proud and confident. And now we've got to figure out how we're going to deal with the quote unquote pressure of being the preseason number one. And so how do you handle, being down at, maybe Irvine or Long Beach or Fullerton or wherever in the Big West, and let's say losing the first set? How do you respond to that? Do you get all kind of frantic because it's not supposed to happen? Or do we remain kind of steadfast and just, wasn't our best set? Here's why, here's the adjustments, okay, go. And so it's this kind of constant evolutionary thing that goes on. But I circle back to your question. I have no doubt, if my first coaching job, let's say, was at Stanford, with the women's team, where you're every year you're 28-2 and you're in the Final Four. I think that start of a coaching career, and certainly not to knock anybody who got the opportunity to do that, but that sets a tone for what your perspective of what coaching could be like. And so then when I go to a different school, let's say as a head coach, that's going to create its own set of differences that are not going to be present like they were at Stanford, because now maybe I don't have the best talent in my gym. Maybe now I have to develop my players in a different way. So the evolution of the coach themselves also plays, I think, a big cog in the wheel, because there's not always going to be just a one-size-fits-all. I think the coaches that have been around, at least in men's and women's volleyball for the number of years they have had to be, kind of chameleons in a way. They've had to adapt. We're starting to recruit kids now who, as an example, were born during the iPhone era. Back in the day when I was playing or coaching, you as an example, it's like we didn't even really have the internet. So
I didn't have a cell phone when I was
there's so many other just distractions, if you will, that are going on. So to see, these coaches like, John Cook at Nebraska or Russ Rose, and the success, Mary Wise at Florida, these coaches that have been doing this for, 20, 30, almost 40 years. Al Skates, for example. I can only imagine, just the amount of time and energy that those different coaches have put into trying to, master their craft. And the fact that it's a constant kind of change every year, just with your roster and personnel and people in your group, really it's just a testament to their ability to, create those cultures, and then also just to be able to maintain them, because there's a lot of other schools out there, that you see that kind of just rise and fall with kind of the tide. Maybe they have a couple of bad years of recruiting or not as effective as they'd like. And there's, like you said, a lot of coaches that I think kind of take maybe more of the easy way out, which is, well, you're just going to be kind of this player. And so this is all we're going to really expect out of you, where, that's that concept where, if ultimately, and I'm, guilty as well, I think every head coach that's being honest can say, I haven't made all the best decisions at times when it comes to offering scholarships. I've missed here or there. I've seen kids, that I've recruited go, I think this would be a great fit for our program. And then all of a sudden you find out that just it's not the right place for whatever reason. And that's not to say it's the person or the player. There's as much on that as me being the head coach, because I'm the one making that decision as well. So, trying to, again, kind of circle back to that, finding ways to connect and to help those players feel, not just here, but feel like they belong, they're part of this group, that they are valued, even if they are, a 4-year bench player, so to speak, and they never really cracked the starting lineup. Those players as well are invaluable to the success of programs, because you need to have a collective group that is united, no matter what your quote unquote role is. everybody wants to go out and kill 5 balls a set and be the All-American, but it's some combination of the kids that sometimes don't get acknowledged for as much as they're valuable to their teams. And they can come in all different positions and all different skill sets. And, some of them have the ability on the bench to be just great teammates in terms of energy and how to, help out those players when it's stressful. And, maybe I'm not too happy with our execution level or our effort level, but, players on the bench are really good at, giving a high five to a player like Adley or to Mima here at Cal, and, having those little words as a counterpart, if you will, to kind of help them make that quick transition into, that mental switch to get them back into playing as well as they're capable. So, again, to me, it's a large part of just the group dynamics, and recruiting obviously is the one way that you can have kind of the biggest impact on that, because you get to the opportunity to kind of select who you want to kind of invite into your bubble. So, it's certainly not as easy as it looks. I don't know how easy it looks from the outside world, but the fans seem to think at times that it should be pretty easy. It's like, oh, you should be just knocking, the top 5 recruits in the country. It's like, yeah, but there's a lot of good volleyball programs out there and a lot of good just in our conference, but also in the country. And the other thing, too, that I think is happening more and more, and I don't have any stats or figures to back this up, but it seems to me that there's a lot more players across the country right now who are almost going, I don't want to say out of their region, but who are willing to go places to go to school. You see a lot of Texas kids coming to California, Arizona, SEC schools. I think the SEC is a conference that's starting to gain more traction from a recruiting perspective. The ACC is getting better. The Big Ten obviously is really good. And so, the concept that recruits are being a little more, I don't want to say knowledgeable, but willing to travel and not just go to, the school that's in my backyard because it's the closest, has really started to kind of grow the competitive level, I think, nationally. In terms of just Division I across the board. So it's certainly becoming more competitive. And it's also fun. It's fun to go out and be in the gym and get to evaluate and, see your coaching colleagues and kind of catch up with them as well. So there's a little bit of a social aspect to the recruiting world, but ultimately I think it comes down to just your word. And who you are and what those around you will say about you. You start to develop, rapport and relationships with these different clubs across the country or the state. And so they kind of, have an idea of, hey, this is this coach, this is who I think would be a good fit for you. And so, all those dynamics start to come into play to kind of help, the process, just because at Cal, I mean, we're almost literally, not that we're traveling obviously at the moment, but, we have a large contingency of international students at Cal as well. And there's a large international student athlete population. So it's not just like being at Poly where maybe I'm recruiting at, California and kind of the West Coast, but at Cal, it's not just our country, but it's players from around the world. So, we rely on a lot on video and contacts and whatnot, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's just about what people are saying and whose word do you trust and respect, and how those kind of relationships kind of continue as each year goes on.
That's awesome. Well, Coach, on my end, Miles might have more, but that's all I got for you. But I wanted to share with you real quick. I remember like it was yesterday, 2004. Coach Wortman was wearing a teal polo, and he's always dressed impeccably. Mm-hmm. You were in a black long sleeve. I'm cruising up to Barb's desk. Don't really know my bearings. First time on campus at University Pacific. I'm a junior in college. Coach Wortman allowed me to go for an unofficial to watch a practice in the Spano Center. I hear Coach Crosson's voice in the background, like, come on, we need SC to win. If they win, we make the playoffs.
Yep.
And then Coach Wortman comes out, says, hi, Kevin, come to my office. He offers me cookies. My dad always told me, he's like, you're going to go to that school. My dad went to University of Portland. Lexi went to Santa Clara. And then I got to meet you, and I watched you. You ran the practice. And then, I know you a lot more than you think because you've hired some of my best friends. So I pick your brain all the time. And then you were gracious enough to let me go to practice at Cal Poly one year. And I'm like, man, this guy's writing so impeccable. Like your writing is just perfect on the board. And I watched you, and I will say, I've gotten to meet some of your athletes that live in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
They just think so highly of you. Your coaching staff thinks highly of you. And believe it or not, the Bishop's boys volleyball team, there's fingerprints of Sam Crosson in that program. And you had a big influence in my life. And
Awesome.
I didn't play for you. And
Yeah.
I remember you would come and watch me. And you don't have to tell me how high I was on your list or low. We don't have to go over that. But I do remember when I'd email you guys, you would come and watch me. So I just appreciate you so much. The Pratte family does, and we're rooting for you. And
Awesome.
like I said, we're going to get my nieces going to your camps, and thanks for being a big influence on my life.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thank you for the kind words there, Kevin. It's part of the journey, so to speak. And hopefully I would love to be one of these guys when I'm long done and in the retired stage of life, and and hopefully be able to keep the connections and come down and say like, yep, I've known this guy since he was in college, and just to hear those things, and it's much appreciated. I can't tell you enough. So thank you for that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I did have the pleasure of playing for you and then working for you as well. And I don't know, I think the thing that impresses me most when I look at just the volleyball landscape is that, again, harkening back to Pacific, we kind of had a small, obviously, small school, kind of nice, tight-knit teams. You and Joe were always there for everybody. And, now there's so many that are out there coaching at such a high level, whether it's the highest levels of club. There are multiple players from when I was there that you were coaching that are now Division I coaches. And so I feel like you definitely helped create a culture that really cultivated, great young men into men that were prepared to go out and do some great things in their communities, whether that was coaching or other jobs. And, I, as a father of two young boys now, I appreciate people who have been able to go out there and do that, not only for myself, but for all those other, men that were able to go through that program and, come out so much better on the other side. So,
yeah.
And I know now that you're able to do that for all these young women that you've been able to coach. And that's great to hear from Kevin, how highly they think of you. Cause, I think between you and Joe, and then, the coaches that came right after you, Dan, you mentioned earlier, Jeff Hall, you guys really did create a great culture there that, was able to continue on and keep being passed down, even to somebody like Matt Houlihan, who we talked to.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're all kind of disconnected a little bit in time, I think it all still stems back kind of from those years that you talked about.
Yeah.
So we appreciate you coming on tonight. Like we said, we're definitely rooting for you. Love to see you beat up on Stanford. That'd be great. They are definitely always at the top, so it's great to see people kind of fight against some of those teams. So
yeah, it's going to be. We'll see. I got a couple of months before we get going here, and it's always fun to challenge the best. You get to find out a lot about who you are and where you're at. So looking forward to it. And once again, gentlemen, I thank you both for giving me the opportunity to come on here. This has been an awesome experience, and certainly wish you guys the best of luck in your personal endeavors and coaching careers, and with the podcast. I think this is phenomenal. So keep it up.
All right. Well, thank you. And we'll definitely have to, have you back. You're a wealth of knowledge. I think we probably only scratched the surface tonight. So
whenever,
at some point,
you let me know. I'm around.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much, Sam. Yeah. And again, Valuable Coaching can be found on YouTube. Please subscribe. Again, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor. We're trying to get our name out there. And again, we got a lot of great knowledge coming from these great coaches. So thank you guys so much. And we'll see you the next time.